A very good evening and welcome this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mwangushampagi. And tonight, National Resistance Movement marks 32 years. Some people want to say President Yoweri Museveni marked 32 years in power. On Friday, the celebration was held in Arua. What does that mean? Especially coming right on the heels of a crackdown and a return of the military to the center of fighting crime and hunting down criminals in this town, where the CMI, the Internal Security Organization, taking the lead in arresting members of the Border 2010, who are being reported on, interestingly, by, we're told, the commander of the Chifesu group. To discuss that, I have a panel tonight, starting with Angelo Izama. Angelo, very nice to have you.
Thank you, Charles.
It's been a while since we last had you here.
Yes, indeed. And I do miss the conversations that take place here, especially off the air.
He's our exotic panelist.
Onapito Ekomoloit. Onapito is Corporate and Legal Affairs Director at Nile Breweries, Ebi InBev. I keep forgetting. Ebi InBev. Very nice to have you.
Good evening, Charles, and nice to be here.
Congratulations, you have a new Amran today. I saw a tweet announcing someone who went to get a wife somewhere in Amuria today, and it's exciting discussion there. But we'll have that discussion another day.
If it's from the land of cattle, we are happy to get back.
No, I'm not sure. I don't know where Lukunjiri is classified, whether it's the land of cattle. There is some cattle in Lukunjiri, but I don't know if it defines itself as that. And of course, we have Dr. Fred Muhumza. Dr. Muhumza, very nice to have you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, our viewers.
One person is missing in studio. We should have had Professor Samuel Sejaka to help us understand the economics of what's going on here. But Dr. Muhumza is also an economist, so we'll go on with the discussion. I want to start with a very broad sweep, Angelo, and starting with you. You're marking 32 years of NRM in power and President Yoweri Museveni in power. People are questioning, where are we on the 10-point program, especially the promise of a self-sustaining, integrated economy? And how does that fit into the broader picture of what we're looking at, which is the growth of organized crime, as we're seeing it today?
Actually, I wrote a blog piece this last month, which started with a quote from a movie that I like, a series called Gotham. The principal mafia guy there in Gotham said something which caught my eye. He said, no, you cannot have organized crime without the rule of law. You know, organized crime is just a protection racket. It operates like this. The mafia threaten you, and the ones with the biggest ability to hurt you are the ones you pay protection money because they keep the other guys away. Mm-hmm. States operate in the same way. They centralize violence, and therefore they can collect taxes from you. The way the political economy is constructed around a state is around the ability of the state to exercise violence. So, for example, this crackdown on criminals is intended to show that, you know, the violence that you should fear is the violence from the state. Well, in Uganda, and we talked about this, I forget the year, but probably around 2010. Mm-hmm. My analysis at the time was that the partisan politics which had drawn in the police and other security agencies had the ability to compromise the main pillars of the state. So the judiciary, for instance, the civil service, and once they do this, they drive certain forms of justice, including economic justice, into a black market. Mm. What that does is that, you know, it allows for alternative groups, organized groups, to basically collect illegal taxes. What I had not put in my analysis at the time, Charles, mm-hmm. was that in around 2010, which is the tail end of the return of broad multi-party politics, I did not see that the political class themselves would join them, you know, the rest of the forces that were interested in profiting from the state. Today, the way we produce power in this society is that it's a very corrupt form of reproduction of political power. We talked about it here. The cost of a constituency is about $100,000. If anyone is running, I think that's the figure that we are playing with. Mm-hmm. But an entire political class that operates, that reproduces power, is willing to pay that upfront. And so you have got one arm of government called the parliament that is completely compromised. Mm-hmm. They are indebted, and we looked at some of their figures the other day. They can negotiate now with the executive for their own pay. I looked at the recent constitutional amendments, and the extension of their term is really a very clever bribe. So in the entire country, we have legitimized corruption as an engine, and that's how I feel that today. I don't know how Dr. Mhumza sees it, or Napito, who's in the corporate world, but I think the entire cost of delivering anything, be it government contracts, being forms of economic justice, whatever, is being held down by inflationary politics that has put a price on everything.
Ona, you keen on having us discuss the goings on around Border 2010 and Chifes and the group, but there is a link. There must be a link that after 32 years, this is what you're debating. Of what should have been an economic miracle.
First of all, Charles, at 32 years, like or hate Yoweri Museveni, must give it to him. Yesterday, a friend shared with me a CIA report of 1984 in the run-up to the second overthrow of Milton Obote. And after reading that report, I concluded that even an RDC of today would have stopped the coup by the Okelos, given the kind of awareness of how to retain power that Yoweri Museveni has calculated in Ugandans. I don't think you could ever have such an inept loss of power by a government. So that's the first thing, that 32 years have not been by accident. But I think then everything we are seeing today is a result of perfecting power retention, The approach the president has taken, which many people basically call patronage, has led to the debate that continues why the economy, himself acknowledges on many occasions, remains stagnant in some areas, much as it has moved in a number of areas. There is so much fusion between the ability to retain power and economic management. And that is where the nexus now is. The president definitely has managed to play a lot of factors using the economic carrot for many players. And I think the compromises he has had to make have created an inertia in delivery. You must have been reading, for example, this recent case of the road contractor who was working on the Tirinyi Road. Which is
the one you're mourning over of dot services, dot technical services.
How the president was able to make dramatic changes in his positions, which I believe he was making political calculations. He knows that such things can be politically risky to just make a purely what looks like a legal decision. You have to weigh a number of factors.
No, but if you looked closely at the particular subject, the reason, one of the major things people have been talking about with this crackdown on the Border 2010 is how they become low unto themselves, but also their development. So you develop them to crush political dissent. And this political dissent is emerging at around the time when you have two major incidents happening in between, two major political incidents happening in between. You have the 2009 Kayunga riots over Buganda Kingdom, the Kabaka of Buganda. Then you have an election that happens in 2011 and walk to work. And you had the IGP prize Border 2010 and say they did an effective job. Now, 7 years later, What are you discussing about Boda 2010? That they murdered somebody, or people associated to them are suspected to have murdered somebody to take how much? 15 million shillings from him. And a car.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that
Yes.
the rise
So
of the
by
Boda
the time
groups
you travel from a promise of building an integrated, self-sustaining economy, 32 years later, is there a meeting point?
I think for Yoweri Museveni, the building of a sustained integrated economy is an incremental process, but he realizes, first of all, you must be in power to do it. So at every stage, the margins of these groups is critical. First of all, to make sure that you are there to be able to have that long-term
Let me take the question just a little. Is it a sign that, is it a failure of delivery? Is it a plus to his success?
I think you're trying to characterize this, Charles, to fit some kind of model. Remember that there are states which coexist with a dark economy. A good example is Mexico. It's a very large and evolved democracy. You know, the PRI, for example, held power there for 70 years. Regular elections. But of course, Mexico also has got the other dark economy, which is completely controlled by mafias and violence of the kind that you can't imagine, that's around the drug wars. Well, the mafia, especially in the regions, are a very political force. They control, they get to the election, they will determine who gets elected, they bribe political power to retain their areas. In many cases, now of course Ugandans who watch, you know, some of the dramatic things that have come out of the mafia stable, like Pablo Escobar and others, they use their economic power to buy political protection. So there is a situation where you can have a fully evolved democracy, but it's not one that where you can expect the kind of welfare state to emerge out of. And that's the kind of stuntedness that
and rather, to your question whether these groups are a sign of a failure, I don't think...
Is it a sign of failure or success?
I think it's a sign of a controlled situation. Because the ability to pull them back, the way we have seen now with whatever 2010, is precisely is there. So they are on a string. So I think that the danger is if the president did not have the capacity to pull them back when they have to be pulled back.
Dr. Muhumuza, you're the economist, so let me come to you. What's your assessment? 32 years later, the performance on the economy. Let's start from there and then we'll see where next we go.
Of course, the performance of the economy is clear to everybody. It's wanting in terms of the growth numbers, in terms of the real take home for people. Everybody seems to be struggling somewhere, including the mafia groups themselves. That's why they are resorting to these kinds of things, because as it has been mentioned, like in the case of Mexico, the state will coexist with these mafia groups, but the mafia groups are not looking at the state for survival because they have drugs to deal with.
They have enough resources of their own.
They have enough resources of their own. These are like the groups you'll find in Libya, in Syria, they annex an oil well, so they are able to feed on their own. Now here, you'll set up Boda 2010 or whichever you have. Either you're going to pay them from the state coffers somehow, or they have to find a way of paying themselves. And I think in one of the books of Vesige, he indicates on this where they were like, you go out and attack a town, the rebel days, the rebellion days of the guerrilla days, bring the weapons, bring in the uniforms, whatever you pick from the banks, and the rest of that one you can keep. So you see that kind of thing that you guys subsist, because Boda 2010, if you go by the stories around town, they were issuing cards to every Boda in town. If you didn't have their card, now if you have over 50,000 Bodas or 100,000 as I hear in this town, how much money was that? But now as we are saying that the economy performs less and less, you see fewer Bodas actually running the town. But this group, remember, is growing bigger and still wants to live large as it has always lived. So possibly now it had opened up another front, because then it could survive on charging and harassing the Bodas. Now that was no longer adequate for them, so they open up another front. At the end of the day, all these things come back to speak of, once the economy is not doing well, the opportunities get smaller and smaller for everybody. So you're likely to see the powerful or those who can muscle power try to squeeze others out or hedge them into corners. And you're beginning to see that when you get into the projects in the road sector, the projects in health, the projects in everywhere where there is a project, people will begin now to fight each other and squeeze each other out there. So the underlying issues of what has failed the economy need to be addressed. Otherwise, you're going to see more of the violence and more of the military come to do the core thing, hold on to power.
Doctor, how do you reconcile this with the narrative that actually there's been a complete turnaround of the economy? The economy of 32 years ago is not the economy you have today. It's much more robust. Yes, you might have slip-ups here and there over the last about 10 years. You can talk about a drop in GDP performance. You can talk about, a drop in poverty rates. No, a resurgence,
yes.
a resurgence
Yes.
of poverty. Numbers, not particularly rates. Actually, even percentages of numbers have gone up by the latest report. But overall, you're talking about an economy that is performing much better, is much more vibrant, is much more organized than you had a few years ago.
I don't know, it depends on which parameters you're looking at. Because if you compare this economy and the economy of the 80s and the 70s, you want to judge the economy by its ability to enable citizens do the basic things that they have to do. Keep their child in school, pay for whatever they have to do. You might have this economy, true, the shops are full of sodas and owners' products, like, compared to the 70s. But people are still not buying them the way they should, those who are especially out of the bottom 10%, because you have a smaller group. So if you want to judge the performance of the economy, you can look at the size. It is certainly bigger. But that's not what makes life and resilience to exist. Otherwise, small things like bacteria and amoeba would have died because they are very small things. But anthrax would bring something as big as a hippo down. So you want to judge resilience and performance not by size, but by these things, as you have mentioned. If the economy cannot sustainably keep people out of poverty, then you begin to question what is happening. If the economy can't sustain its growth centers that propelled it 10, 15 years ago, what has happened? The key drivers of this economy 10, 15 years ago are no longer driving it, and they have not handed over to others. So was it robust then? Because if it was robust and resilient, it should have sustained its trajectory on the basis of that and brought in others. Look at our strategies that we did. The plan was do infrastructure. It will drive the growth. Now you have some basic infrastructure here and there, and it's not driving the growth. So what happened? Or what didn't we do that ought to have leveraged that? Our power to build infrastructure is now becoming questionable, even to build a road. The Trinity Road you're talking about here is 100 kilometers. 5 years down the road, it's not done. I have another road that I go through going to Hoima. Between Rubuji and Ibusunju, it's just about 40 kilometers. For 5 years, the road is not complete. And this is part of the oil road network. Because people are thinking the oil road network is the one in Bulisa. Before any truck gets to Bulisa, it has to go through
certain roads, yes.
Certain roads. So if you can't even deliver projects that you were delivering a few years ago, then I doubt whether branding the economy as more resilient, as more versatile, is the way to go.
So Charles,
yes,
to put it differently, there is a major contradiction in our political economy. The way Ona has described the ability of the president to retain power has been power is the country. The politics of the country is a protection racket. Every election, what we're really protecting is the presidency, and the president is now secure. Of course, the age limit has been lifted, and however, it has come at a huge cost. So the huge cost is first of all the cost of elections, and the cost of the political class, who now must get something out of the state in order to maintain this protection, that insulation of the presidency. Well, Yoram Museveni likes to say that, well, with, like Ona says, with him retaining power, perhaps you can wait longer for the economy to eventually take off. And I see the way he has approached it is by fixing the parts of the economy that really need to hold the thing together. So, for example, in the work that we do, we say the economy has got pockets of efficiency that make it run. Tax collection is solid. Fiscal and monetary policy has got good people around it. The military is well resourced. but everything else is for tax. So the groups that protect the political system, those have to be fed. And that include the group that the police has been working with that basically outsourced, it's like a criminal enterprise. The rationale behind it is that as long as the crime they are doing
it does not threaten the politics.
It does not threaten the politics, then it can be, it's okay. When there are times when the opposition is on the streets, then they become effective. By the way, in 2010, I had a conversation with none other than the IGP. I hope he can recall, and I repeated it in another interview, and I told him at the time that, look, we have judged that the knock-on effect of the 2007 economic slowdown, the financial crisis, would hit Uganda at some point, and that means that there's going to be what we call urban fragility. People coming to the cities, but there are no jobs. That is not a policing matter. It's a matter for economic policy. So I actually had this chat with him. I told him, no, don't put the police on the streets, because that is not a law enforcement issue. Hand this over to the politicians to deal with, because you will never run away from providing jobs.
Can the military restrain itself? Now that the CMI is taking the lead in the crackdown against Border 2010.
But I thought we should...
For crimes or for whatever it is, some people will think these are military generals jostling for control. Whatever that control is supposed to lead up to, Ona has a good way to look at it. He says the way the power is structured in this country, there is only one link to the man at the top. All the rest are the same plane. So you don't have, from 32 years ago, you don't have a growth of comrades that look at each other at the same level. You have people...
Rivals.
People rivaling here at the lower level, but at the higher level they have a commander.
Charles, I think before Angelo answers that political question, I wanted to give my take on the economy. For me, my argument would be that yes, the economy has grown. There are a lot of pieces of evidence. The big ticket items, of course, say there is we can argue about the roads, but there's a decent roads, motorway road system. There is power is fairly stable, and of course security is the big one for everyone to be able to move and do what they want. But the crisis is in distribution. That's really bread and butter issues are still what we are grappling with. A huge population is still not able to meet the critical bread and butter issues, and that's a personal level, and even then government delivery of what you call social services, That's where the challenge is. And I think it's not even touched. Whether you can have an efficient health system, efficient education system, things that you can build all the schools you want, but if people cannot actually take their kids through the schools and at ease, you can build all the hospitals, but if they cannot go and get medicine and get workers who are to attend to them with ease, then we are still having a big challenge.
There's a way in which this, Angelo, I'll just come back to the same question. It ties in. If you look at the profile of a man like, and we must be fair to him, he hasn't been prosecuted yet, he's still a suspect, Abdallah Chitata, and where he emerges from. Drops out of school, gets onto a border. And people have talked for many years about this border economy. And this is where you have arrived. Where's the link here?
Well, the consolidation always comes from the state. We give an example of the United States. There was a period of the mafia and the robber barons. They controlled huge estates. They built businesses that that are based on exploitation. But at some point, the state had to crack the whip and create rules for everyone. And the sort of economic justice that Onai is talking about, which you can't distribute, is because the capacity of the state has been compromised by this politics. I said earlier that a good welfare state cannot emerge from these circumstances. And you remember there was this last medical strike. The medical strike, and then the public got behind it, but I think the public was concealing its own anger about poor health care. I would have said, had I been here, that look, just 25% of the working doctors are employed by the government. Of all the doctors that are registered there, I think they gave me the numbers, about 5,000 or slightly more in the medical association. only 1,000 are government workers.
Yes, and do you know what ratios that gives you? It gives you 1 doctor to 15,000 people.
Yes.
I think someone is actually giving a number of 1 doctor 24,000.
Yeah, but the point I want to make is that public health care is really private. It is only public by name. And when you look at what the quality of private health care that has gone to subsidize now what the state would have done, it is really terrible. Patients get misdiagnosed, there's no proper regulation, there's expired medicine on the shelves, medical malpractice goes unpunished. In general, it's chaotic. Why? Because at the same time, the way the politicians are approaching a strike by medical doctors is because it's been politicized, right? Makes the government look bad, they negotiate with a small group of people, but the larger issue is doesn't get addressed.
Doctor, if you just close with you before we take a break. How do you explain the things that Angelo and On are talking about?
I think I've just mentioned that for an economy to survive, and that's why I said it's not about the size, it's about the dynamics. You may find a mosquito is more complex in life to survive than a lion. Lions, as we've already said, are very fragile. They don't eat grass. They must eat some animals. So by nature, they revolve around that distribution network to make sure don't eat the very young ones, eat the very old, so they will stampede and look for the old one. There are some rules behind the scenes. The moment you let the lions have their day as kings of the jungle, then the jungle cannot build you an economy. So in this economy, you have an issue of distribution. That the well-to-do in terms of elite politics, those with elite capture, have grabbed all the money through corruption and build real estate and build all sorts of things, hoping they will earn money, revenues from these investments. Now remember, it's me and you to rent in their places for them to get the return. Now at the end of the day, since we are poor and we're just struggling with issues of bread and butter, can I manage this? There's nobody who's going to be living in a house of $1,000, which this guy is expected to get back. So real estate collapses, and now they have to look at other things. They have hounded us all from our pieces of land, so we can no longer even farm and grow ourselves something to eat. Everybody is crowding into the towns, not look for jobs, but where else do I go? So that will drive the crime. So you need to get back to what they have said the Americans had to do. Reestablish the rules, because if you do not do that, this economy can be headed one way.
The question we'll answer when we come out of the break. Can you reestablish the rules, or is, as Ona says, by the president showing that he can call back some of these groups and he can pull back, he's holding them on a leash? Can you reestablish the rules in the circumstances which we have today? After a short commercial break. Still watching the Fourth Estate, and we're discussing 32 years of President Yoweri Museveni and the National Resistance Movement, particularly looking at the economy, but also asking the question, what is going on, especially when you have rogue elements like Border 2010, or groups like that turning rogue when they are actually under the protection and care of security agencies. Let me rephrase this question a little bit. We asked the question when we were taking the break, can the rules be reestablished? What would it take to have the rules reestablished? Dr. Muhumuza, let me start with you again.
I think it takes back to the change of the politics, because this is about the politics. It has to be a different kind of politics if you are to even think about changing the rules. Or somebody getting dissatisfied, because the only thing you'll be counting on the NRM is the 32 years, the 33 years, the 34 years. Because a lot of things that were there before the counting began are beginning to creep back. The roads are nice to mention. Now you have 35 kilometers of roads, 5,000 tarmac, or whatever it is. But what is moving on these roads is what matters to the people. Because I would go back to my days, the roads were not tarmac, but my parents were selling their coffee and cotton, and were going to school, and were getting medical care free of charge. Whether going by bicycle, there were no borders certainly. But those are the kinds of things people want. You don't show them that there is this when they are not actually getting any tangible benefit out of it. Now, to get to that is going to get back to, have you reached a level where somebody has decided to build a welfare state? Not the like you'll find in the Nordic countries, but at least to say, can there be inclusive growth and benefit for the common person in this economy? Now, that's a political decision anchored on the change of the political orientation. Is it still about can we hold on to power regardless of what happens? The Mugabe kind of style of holding on to power. I don't mind whether Zimbabwe goes to, I don't want to say the dogs. The dogs have grown up and they have been my friends all through life. Surely they don't deserve that statement. But it doesn't mind what happens to the economy as long as I am sitting in here and controlling power. And you'll hear most of some NRM people will be telling you, yeah, well, joke with us who have held power. But what have you done with the power is what you need to begin interrogating in order for the rules to change.
Angelo, Joseph Nwabin is watching us and he says, I think many of the weaknesses or challenges registered under NRM are a product of its achievements. But also, almost every government, by any stretch of imagination, has been largely a victim of internal sabotage. NRM is not an exception. Point number 7 of the 10-point program is a major eyesore to NRM.
It's not actually, it's not what he calls sabotage. I think this Tojikwata core age limit debate, something was missed which some of us emphasize. That I think for you to change the rules, you need to take away the weight of elections from the president. Because he knows the history of this country. He knows you can lose power. And there are also people who have built an industry around scaremongering. He's only human. And he has to rely on what other people will tell him in addition to his own knowledge of the country. So long as he has to go through an election, people are going to come in the name of helping him win that election, the name of protecting him, and compromise the laws of an efficient economy. So if only in the argument of age limits, people had realized that you don't just need age limit, you need also to limit the damage of electioneering for its own sake on the economy, in my view. I think I've made my point clear that it wouldn't matter whether you have Yoweri Museveni go through an election or he doesn't have to go, so long as you have an economy that step changes.
The question on somebody would ask, what would President Museveni, for example, need to do to harness those pockets of efficiency that both you and Angelo talked about that exist to make the economy function better?
That's why I'm
when at the same time he's pursuing,
you first need to remove the noise around him that is concentrated on elections and keeping power, for him to be able to not allow compromises, which some of them have been exposed.
Can he?
I guess until we change the way elections are organized, which unfortunately is not about to change. We are likely to continue where we are.
Angelo, at a time like this, what you'd want to do is, because I have been told from fairly reliable sources, as we call them in journalism.
Usually reliable sources.
Yes, usually reliable sources. The number one is the president, I think, has sent a team to Kasese to try and understand, why do you guys hate us so much? And try to banish the image created by the police and the military during that crackdown when they were arresting Mumbere. It's a completely separate effort that's going on there. The crackdown against Boda Boda 2010, one is that, yes, other arms of intelligence were able to pick up information about a group that has made so many other people feel uncomfortable. So they are deciding to crack down, and he's given the blessing that they can crack down on them, but that affects one of his biggest cadres in terms of collecting votes and sustaining his power in politics. So how do you strike the balance? Because you need to be able to deliver some functional economy. You need to be able to reverse the poverty numbers. Now we're talking about 10.6 million Ugandans who are in absolute poverty. On that you can add about another 15 million that hover around the edge. Depending on when you go to do the count, they could fall on the other side, or their extreme vulnerabilities. You have very few people who feel they are secure in the economy the way it is structured. That will breed one anxiety. Anxiety will make your politics sometimes difficult, because it's what exactly led to walk to work that Boda Boda 2010 were being praised for. What would President Museveni need to do to harness those pockets of efficiency and go back to delivering what he had promised to deliver?
I think this is really out of his hands because I think he will spend the rest of his perpetual terms basically trapped in the electoral circle. In fact, if you think about it, first of all, let me say, Charles, remember, by the time I came politically aware and I personally thought I could participate, sensibly in politics, the issue that the country was facing then was, should parties return? And we spent a lot of time on the run-up to the referendum. I was on the no side, I thought that the kind of electoral competition would weaken the forms of decision-making, and I think it's been borne by time. Now we have got a very inflationary type of electoral democracy that just grows a political class that then, spends its time politicking. When he got elected in 2006, I think he spent 3 years governing, 2 years, electioneering. In the next election, he spent 3 years electioneering, 2 years governing. In the current mode, there is no government. There is just politics.
Politicking.
Yeah, politics.
And this is likely to run through the year.
Throughout
the remainder of the
now
term.
you can imagine, even with the protected presidency, it's insulated.
Yeah.
Because what the age limit has done is that it has granted him perpetual immunity. But now he has to deal with these contending forces around him, which have been the price of the cost of the peace. The cost of the peace has been, like I said, this very corrupt election machine. Now, Dr. Muhumza was saying that as the basket becomes smaller and smaller, everyone becomes hungry. Well, if you project in 10, 15
the basket
years,
is becoming smaller. Everyone is becoming hungry when appetites have grown.
Well, actually, there are people who hold the basket, and they're the ones responsible now.
The basket is bigger, but the people holding are becoming
for handing out.
The appetite has grown.
Even the basket, even for them, the basket is becoming smaller, so they can't hand out as they used to.
Now, I have a small risk practice that is meant to provide advice for non-government organizations and some corporates on how to navigate this new situation. But I tell you, Charles, that today, for you to get into any contract, you have to break into several cabals. It's hundreds and thousands of dollars of dealing with this civil servant, with that regulatory body, with things like that. And the people who are the beneficiaries of this elite corruption, they are not acting out of confidence. They are dealing with their own uncertainty about the future. They look at the next 10 years, they will be in their 60s. They are externalizing their income. They are putting it in Dubai. They are putting it in South Africa, in Malaysia, and other places. And they just want to take as much as possible out of this basket, okay, to save in their own external granaries. It is not an act of confidence. Now, you look at what the problems we are building up are. Well, like I said, without economic justice, you cannot have inclusive growth, to use Dr. Muhumza's word. You are polluting the environment because people are cutting down trees. There's unplanned growth of towns and cities. Healthcare is bad. You will have a situation, I think, in another 10, 15 years, of what we saw here in Kayunga or Walk to Work, at the scale at which the population is at that time. Now, I do not know many governments, even with the type of capacity that the Ugandan military has, that can deal with that kind of economic avalanche. But it is building up. Now, to reset that clock, and I have said it, you need some kind of political crisis, a major crisis that reboots the way the state is organized. My own view has always been that you need a crisis deep enough to change the electoral system, reduce the number of elected leaders, put someone in power who can completely reorganize the civil service and realign it, and then have a public that is willing to pay the price for the new order. Now, I can tell you the people there out on the street, especially this elite, they are willing to put their heads in the sand until something changes.
You just had an amendment to the Constitution, so that means how much more time are you imagining for that
But
crisis to emerge?
there's been no, that wasn't the crisis.
Actually, that was my disappointment.
You know,
that if we hadn't changed
yeah.
the constitution, that crisis was going to happen. Because if the president said this guy is served something, I'm wondering what that was. Maybe that was the crisis.
That would have been the crisis.
We just missed the opportunity.
In fact, Doctor, in June, I wrote, and some of my friends in the NRM were like, oh, you know, Angelo, you're painting us as simply a corrupt group of people. Because I had said, why go through the process of consulting and whatever? Why not just bribe the MPs and reduce the scale of people you deal with? You know, because you would reduce the cost.
The cost, yes.
Already on the public purse. But that crisis became a non-crisis. Obviously, you know, those of us who do this kind of calculation, we have to now go back to the books and say, where else will a crisis big enough, you know, to topple the current political order come from?
I think as Zona has put it rightly, whatever crisis should be, it should first remove this thing called electoral democracy. Because democracy is being questioned globally on whether it can actually put in place the government that will take care of people. There are places where we say democracy, but I sometimes wonder whether it's democracy or the kingdom kind of thing. The Nordic countries, some of them are actually kingdoms. You look at Botswana, this is basically a kingdom, one family looking after itself. So you cannot say because these guys have had 7 or 8 elections. China is one of the big powers, if not the big power economically today. I don't remember when they last had an election.
Yeah,
their kind of democracy structured differently.
Because I think at 32, the challenge this country still faces, we have a hangover of history, whereby people who are controlling the politics of today know what happened to others, and they live in perpetual fear of suffering the same fate. And so they don't even know whether they can avoid that fate by voluntarily leaving power and just letting others. So they just trying to control the levers of history by making sure you don't want to, contemplate being in that situation.
And like Animal Farm, they will keep scared, you want Mr. Jones back, you know? And it's definitely not sustainable. I have a colleague I met.
So I think, I hope one day we shall have a political time when the people in office will not be encumbered by the fears of history, where they think, well, you can...
But and if you look back at the kind of...
Someone will again say, you have had 32 years of steady hands. And one of a viewer here is sharing a message and says, 32 years of NRM can be equated to a man who washes his white linen very successfully, but finally spread them onto the mud. He who never washed saved energy, soap, water, and time. Is that rather...
And a wet cloth in mud gets even worse than a dry cloth.
That's what he's
mud.
saying.
So the other guy is better off,
yes,
the one who didn't even wash.
And then there is someone, I think Bernard Mpairwe, he's in Lubaga, he says, to me the economy is much better than in the 80s, but my concern is the improvements in economy compared to the time of 32 years leaves us with many questions. We would have expected better results if it was to appraise this government. I would give them 60%, yet would have expected 80% and above. I think there has been some wasted years along the way. The important question for me, Dr. Mhumuza, is not to look at what has been wasted in the last 32 years.
Yeah.
The question is, where are we going? Are we prepared to go there?
I think even in economic analysis, sometimes you want to tranche the period you are looking at. We can't even be talking about 32 years. There is a 10-year period you have to look at differently. The 1986 to 1996. Before elections, things began. And a lot of the things we are seeing today, the seed was sown in that 10-year period. So this was the 22 years have disenfranchised the 10. And this is what we are saying. The 10 did not have a fear of losing power through election or holding it through election. The moment we went into this election mode, things began to go off the board.
But someone listening to you, and especially an owner who makes this case very strongly all the time, is you have gone through motions of attempting or wanting to make a constitution. You've made it in that first 10 years.
Sure.
You've gone through motions called elections over the last extra 22 years, from 1996 to today. You've gone through motions. Now you have begun even working backwards
Yes.
on that constitution to remove those safeguards.
Yep.
What exact message would you be sending to people who are thinking, well, the crisis over the constitution amendment is part of the crisis, but something you can overcome? Isn't this a message of resignation and saying, well, things have collapsed so badly, there's nothing we can do, there's no power anywhere else?
Because actually, even the constitution you're talking about, remove some of these things that we have actually removed. You wonder what is left of it. Because may still be a monster there. I don't know how many pages. But some of these clauses actually are the mother clauses of everything. So you are back to the period before the constitution itself. Because then there was no scare of anybody losing power. And that's exactly, specifically the NRM as we knew it then. Now the NRM has been narrowed down to possibly the person of Mr. Museveni. And you have just brought that back, that there is no scare that at any one time, whether limits of age, limits of anything, will take away that from him. So was it even necessary in the first place to do this experiment? Now that's why you are saying, going forward, I don't even see any certainty, because the parameters are so fluid, compared to if we had remained then, you would have said, okay, here is like the Chinese party. It has ruled China for so many years.
And the economy.
But
It's not about to lose its power. It knows how it retains
I
it.
think
But it's not spending money as we are doing here and jokes. To keep that, it's focusing on the economy.
Doctor, I want to disagree with you a little. I think people don't understand the functioning of the Chinese Communist Party. Between 1980 and today,
Yes.
China has had 5 different presidents,
Yes, exactly.
and each one of them serving 10 years.
Yes.
But only because Mao died. If Mao were to live by some...
But that's exactly what I'm
he
saying.
would
Now,
still be
here we are
there.
thinking you need an electoral democracy to change presidents. Now here you have a system which religiously, for the last 30, 40 years, has actually been changing
Without
presidents.
Yes.
And in a way that does not distort the economy,
Yes.
but actually builds the economy.
Because there is a power center somewhere.
At the end of the day, you have
Which is
one
the army.
you have 1% of
Angela,
Ugandans
that will
who
take
eat
us-
on this politics.
And
The rest of
that
us
will take
eat on the
back-
economy.
will take us back somewhere. Some arguments or some analysts talking about the events of the last few weeks will look to generals contesting for who has more favor, who has the listening ear of the president, and who is falling out of that favor. The reason is you have the structure that we talked about. One person at the top, the rest at the same level, they have no control over the top. They look up to commander. They don't look at comrades. In China, what you have is you have comrades who will sit 3,000 strong, spend a week discussing, decide who's going to be the leader for the next 10 years.
And by
So
the
they
way,
can
but
decide
Charles,
even ahead of time.
they don't even
Evangelo
decide
Gas.
in that meeting. They have decided years back. This man says I slept in a cave way back in the 70s. So they have a whole crop of people who are being prepared for different positions.
Yes.
Yeah,
Way
because-
back in time.
Because
The
I think
difference-
Evangelo comes in. I just made my point that China is now in a post-Mao era. We are still in a Mao era. I think Uganda under
Yeah.
post-Yoweri Museveni may go into that, where people in the NRM who are in the bush and what have you will be able then
Angela,
have a
what's the chance
collegial
that can
leadership.
happen? Because you need to build to that. And,
Yes.
and China's success between 1980 to today, economic success, can be attributed to some groundwork that built up to that. Have you done that groundwork to build up to what China has achieved, both on the ability to change its leaders, or manage the politics rather, I should have used that, manage the politics in a manner that actually does economic transformation, delivers economic transformation?
Well, the Chinese leaders, the one thing that they fear the most is that the state will be destabilized by widespread inequality. So, you know, they keep their eye on the economy because they know truly unequal society is a threat to that system. And under this new leader of theirs, he's just been
President Xi?
re-elected, he has gone actually for the root of the problem.
Which is?
He's busting basically China's mafia networks. He's jailed a number of prominent people. He's making it clear to the ordinary Chinese that they will not be left behind by a system. that will create a privileged class and favor the privileged class over, you know, distributing.
The larger, yes.
Distributing. I think in our case, until you get rid of this electoral democracy, I know, and some people who are listening to me who know my feelings about about democracy, I really exist with some. I have a very ambivalent relationship with democracy. I was on the no side of the referendum. I thought parties were actually bad. I was convinced by Mr. Museveni at the time. Since then, I have had to operate in an ideological space that really believes that where a democracy functions as designed, that it protects good decision making that leads to this kind of you know, inclusive development. I was not prepared in my adult years to just be a witness, democracy being totally appropriated and corrupted. And therefore, even the system, the state, you know, like I said, all the major pillars of the state have been compromised under this idea that we must maintain some kind of legitimacy based upon an election. You know, I was speaking to a class of Western students at a university after the Kenyan crisis in 2008. And I told them, you know, ideologically and normatively, you guys have to create a space where we can look at African democracy as managed democracies. Because I don't see that that the system that the elections in Kenya. In fact, there was a time when you could say, okay, look at every upcoming election in Africa, and there you can plot the nature of stability on the continent. Yes. Because everywhere you have got an election, you have got the potential for instability. Now, if you could take away what Ona was talking about, the burden of elections, and find a system, and at that time that system in Kenya was the government of national unity, you know, find something like that that works, then perhaps we can leave the state room to breathe and to deliver the kind of social services.
Wouldn't that be based on the intention of that state actually to
just to underscore the futility of elections, none other than Kizza Besigye, who has been the closest to Yoweri Museveni in terms of electoral chances. He was on this show with us, declaring that elections, as we know it in this country, won't make any difference. And so clearly...
The question is, what will make that difference?
Well, that's what some of us are saying, that what will make the difference is
which
there are models. Aside from outright crisis that will decimate this elite, and I think it would come to Uganda, because I see the way that you know, the fights over contracts is breeding much more uncertainty. And you know, this is a very unstable form of stability, if I could put it like that. I know that's an oxymoron, but there has to be a political moment, and I talked about it as a constitutional crisis, where you redraw the rules. Okay. I have proposed, instead of an election at one point in this country, elect a new CA, redraw that constitution, reduce the number of people in parliament, provide a place for the military that is stable, and agree on an economic model that favors citizens. Right now, we don't have all those things.
I'm just wondering what kind of environment creates that opportunity, because you leveraged the crisis of pre-1986 to create the 10 years that Doctor was talking about that need to be put out of this discussion.
The 32 years.
Yes, of the 32.
Charles,
can we can we pick this up after a very short break? We've stretched already. We'll be right back. You're still watching The Fourth Estate, and we're discussing 32 years of President Yoweri Museveni, but celebrated at a time, or commemorated at a time, when you have a crackdown against what has been described as a rogue group called Boda Boda 2010, a group that emerged, and according to the words of the Inspector General of Police, General Kale Kayihura, was helpful in cracking down against walk-to-work protesters in 2011. Now, walk-to-work protests grew and were sustained by a bad economic situation. And we're asking, how has the NRM performed in the last 32 years on the economy?
But Charles, yes. you cut me off when I was trying to say, the three of you say you need a crisis to take a decision whether to have elections or not. I don't think you need a crisis. Actually, we need stability. There's no doubt about that. And I think this last opportunity, there's still room for because now they want to go for a referendum, which is futile. to decide whether Yoweri Museveni should be there for 5 or 7 years. It didn't just sober heads to have said, instead of removing age limits, you need to just create a new political dispensation which allows him to remain with the power without necessarily going through the gymnastics.
Why do you think President Yoweri Museveni is so central to the past, the present, and the future of this country?
I mean, that's
a
a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer. I mean, the economy of the country as we know it, it was made in his image. Since 1986, we are running a country that's in the image of Yoweri Museveni. You have to be delusional to think that
The only
you
thing
can do
he has
anything
not done
without
is to
him.
put his head on the money, like guys did.
Everything.
But I
all
am
the
about
pillars
to,
of the state, the
I am
people
about
who
to petition
matter.
the central bank.
The people who
To put
matter.
him on. I think we should take a public interest litigation.
Yeah, in fact, if the governor is listening, I'm going to petition him to bring an amendment. Because I think there was an agreement post 1986 that a sitting president who's alive should not be on the currency. But it has been overtaken by events. I think Yoweri Museveni should have his face and image on that currency.
Because in any case, you've had is what? This is my oil, my money, you know. Why don't
And you're not doing it in jest. Look, Yoweri Museveni, I think has been, because, anyway, let's put it like this. State building in Africa has been directed first by the Cold War, but by the time he came into power, largely by the loss of the communist bloc. And the rules that these guys imposed were, you know, for you to be accepted in the community of nations, you must do these things that he's been doing, which is, you know, liberalize your economy, hold elections, put in place certain types of state institutions. And I think that's what he did, because that is the cost of him retaining power. Had the Soviet bloc won, I think we would have had a very different kind of political system. I've been following, because I think in the 60s he used to talk about class warfare, and how at some point as the economy expands, there will be social forces contending with each other, and he applied his mind to it. But I think at that time he was speaking about it on behalf of workers,
Yes.
not on behalf of those who might exploit those workers. They still, in his thinking, especially when he talks about these structural, strategic bottlenecks, he still thinks about class warfare. But now, I think that he's been overtaken by a situation where in Uganda you essentially have got two classes: a state-based political class that is privileged, and another class that is everyone else.
Let me place it this way, Angelo, before I let go of you. If you saw what happened when the CMI and the other security agencies went to pick up Abdullah Tata's brother, border riders organized themselves and attempted to fail that arrest just outside of Kampala. They were overwhelmed and they were able to push them back. Now you're talking about that kind of class warfare. Is there a chance that people can actually mobilize themselves and say, no, because this is where our interests coalesce, we can be able to push back?
No, but that's because look, the absurd thing about the border story is that, without stating it obviously, the border they shared the legitimacy of the state. They really thought of themselves and as an extension of the state, and they may have felt disgruntled that, you know, their leaders were being attacked, when in fact, you know, we're all part of the same system.
There's a tweet making rounds now of the Minister for Security, General Henry Tumukunde, who's been a guest on this show talking about almost the same things before. Talking about if there is that above. He says the era of above has ended. Do you believe him? Do you think the era of above has ended?
And I don't want to comment too much on what he said, because there's been tension between him and other rivals within that security establishment. But I think outsourcing the political muscle to these borders, in a situation where in our cities you had lots of young men unemployed, was the wrong thing to do in the first place. I think that the president, at the time this issue came up after the Kayunga riots, and when he talked about youth livelihood programs and others, would have instead sat with civilians and approach this thing in a non-security fashion, which is to say, okay, you've got thousands of unemployed young people. Can we organize them into serious blocks, I mean functional groups, and deal with their joblessness the way that normal governments do?
I can tell you, Angelo, that that effort has been undertaken with various groups. The women who were demonstrating, you remember the women who were demonstrating around some time back, were settled.
As I was told, that the ministers who were given these, they gave budgets to the president. And then we all know that, you know, young men and young women recruited from, you know, universities and others, including those who were with now these border borders, were simply paid off.
Yes.
To put aside their grievance.
Let me pick a caller. Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, sir. Your name and where are you calling from?
Yes, this is Ankton.
Yes, Ankton.
And I'm calling from Zova.
Please.
And now, so far, ever since I've watched the fourth estate, this has been the most sober discussion that I've watched, because I'm a realist.
Yes, please.
And I like it so much if we go this direction and this whole election thing goes off. You see, there is a philosopher in the French Revolution who was called Voltaire. He said, you'd rather be ruled by one lion other than 1,000 rats. When you look at this parliament and whatever they are doing, it is all farcical. Just imagine if Museveni stayed alone and this parliament is not there. What would be the impact? What would be the change? Firstly, the decisions will be made very quickly and very cheaply. And all the amount of money that is being given to them is also just going to be directed towards economic development. And let President Museveni not be afraid that if you look like a dictator, people will hate you. Because there have been some progressive dictators. For example, Napoleon Bonaparte is seen to be one of the greatest dictators that has lived. But he is one of the most loved leaders that has ever lived also. Because even when he was pushed away by the coalition in Europe, out of Europe, and was exiled at Elba, he came back to France and he was walking alone. And when the people of France heard about him coming back, they all laid down and they welcomed him and put him back on the same chair to dictate again. So if you're a dictator, but you're progressive and you're doing great things for the economy, people can like you. Instead of these jargons and wasting our money and beating us and tear gassing us, this whole farce can end. And please continue discussing like that.
Thank you, Ankton.
To look at NTV. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ankton wants action.
You want action? Do we have another caller? That's one opinion. Can it work?
No, it's interesting.
I
That
think
scene where
I agree with
Napoleon escaped.
I agree with him. Yes.
Napoleon, he slips away, and then he confronts, you know, French soldiers who when they saw him,
we'll come back to the discussion. Hello?
got on his horse and they looked at him and they said, shouting, "Emperor."
Hello.
Yes, sir. Your name and where are you calling from?
Yeah, I'm Reggie Moses, calling from Tinda.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Go ahead and make your comment or question.
I'd like to make my comment.
Yes.
Unlike the...
Sorry, lost him.
We lost you because where you were, it was quite noisy. Hello? You have another caller? Okay.
No, look, I was saying it may appear like...
Sorry. Sorry, I'll keep cutting through until... hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, please. Your name and where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you. Your name and where are you calling from?
My name is Margaret, and I'm calling from Kampala.
Yes, please.
Hello, am I on air?
Yes, you're on air. We can hear you.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment to the gentleman.
Yes, please.
To know that Uganda is not going to end with President Museveni.
Go ahead. Hello?
Yes, Uganda is not going to end with President Museveni, and we need to be thinking about making plans that are going to impact the future generations. And not...
Thank you. Hello? Okay, you're watching yourself. You're listening to yourself, actually. Please, when you call us, kindly turn down the volume on your TV set. I think we lost the lady there. She says Uganda is not going to end with President Museveni.
Yeah, look, I was making the point with the earlier caller was saying, yes. I know many people think you guys is preaching resignation and what have you, not advancing. But look, we must evaluate the country in the context of Uganda, the context of history. We are not talking the abstract. And I agree with the lady as well, that there are things which are going to happen after Yoweri Museveni. They will happen. Yep. We almost use the China example, and I go back to the point that we are in a Mao era. There will be a post-Mao era in Uganda where there will be a collegial leadership, where there will be no strong man as strong as Yoweri Museveni. You will have that.
But let me ask the question.
But until when you get there, just hold on. Until when you get to that point, it is you must recognize the reality of what we are in, because we have lived long enough in it to be able to be foolhardy, doing the same thing, expecting different results. Is the definition of what?
Let me throw in. Let me throw in to all of you gentlemen. Would it be fair?
Yes.
To Chairman Mao to compare him with President Yoweri Museveni? Would it be fair to compare Lee Kuan Yew with President Yoweri Museveni? Would it be fair, Angelo?
Well, only for the fact that he's a Ugandan and the other one's Chinese, but the mode of leadership is comparable.
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, please. Your name and where you're calling from?
This is Margaret from Kampala.
Yes, please.
Just come back.
And I just wanted to finish my point and
yes, please.
say that...
Hey, kindly turn down the volume on your TV set.
And
yes. Okay.
Can you see now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, and I just wanted to make a point to Mr. Napito to stop talking about Uganda being in the Mao era and tell us about how we get to the post-Mao era. That is what we are interested in. Secondly, we did not tune in tonight to listen to whether Uganda needs elections or not. We tuned in tonight to do an audit of the NRM 32 years in existence, what it has done for us as a country. So in my opinion, I think that the discussion started off well with Dr. Muhumuza talking about the economy, but I think that it was completely derailed, and I think it was derailed on purpose. So then maybe next week you can actually talk about an honest audit and talk about how we move to a post-Mao era instead of talking about the fact that we are in a Mao era. And that is really what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Hear you. Gentlemen, let's come back here. Honor, can you respond to the lady, please?
No, the lady is absolutely right. That, but you can't force a post-Mao era. It had to happen. And there are people who believe that it's only going to happen through natural causes. I mean, you don't have to like it, but we have to deal with the reality.
And in the meantime, where should
in
Ugandans
the meantime, that's why we
energies?
are suggesting that we should not be pursuing something that has not worked.
Which is elections and electoral democracy.
And we are not just around this table. The contestants
so the moment
in the election have come to that conclusion.
Elections ended. So you're advising people, go back to your gardens, go do whatever you want to do, wait for time, and then when the time is right, you'll come up. You'll wake up and come back to... Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm not even suggesting.
I think it's...
the people who participated in the last election, one of them was on this table with us. And he was saying these elections is not the way to go for now.
Yes,
of course, he had other alternatives.
My question
he wanted a violent alternative, which is open to him.
Angelo, you are an advocate of no elections. So what should Ugandans do in the meantime? Because the economy, I'm wondering, and this is why we'll need to conclude the discussion, by the way, to ask, what in the next 3 years
should be done
can turn around this economy and deliver on what President Museveni and the NRM promised, which was Kisanja Kuna Mchezo and the delivery to a middle income status 2020. What needs to be done? But in the meantime, what should Ugandans do?
Well, first of all, on your last point, the entry of the military into public affairs, particularly to settle the anxieties brought about by all the killings, the muggings, the home invasions. I think there's just my feeling is there's been a collective sigh of relief from the public. You know, people have felt more reassured about their safety. I hope they deepen and intensify this process such that, you know, we don't have to fear for our lives when we step out on the street. But alongside that, the president, now that he feels much more perhaps secure, I think he should crack the weapon, wanton corruption. There has to be a strategy to reduce corruption, and that has to be separated from politics. The reason why people are stealing so much money is partly because they want to be sure that to deal with future uncertainty, but at the same time, many of them think that political power is the only kind of power that can offer you security. I'm surprised Onapito is not building a war chest to run again for parliament. But you know, the biggest lottery in Uganda is the parliamentary lottery. Everyone is trying to, you know, sell whatever they can to run for elections. That political class must be evacuated root and branch before we can get some rest.
It's not just at that level, it's at very different levels. Chitata we're talking about is chairman of Waga division for the NRM.
Yeah, and the figure I quoted from the Electoral Commission was that they had over 1.7 million posts that were electable in Uganda. You can't have a situation like that, people. You know. But in terms of the system, of course I disagree with Dr. Besigye. His view about some kind of national reconciliation and others have been formed under this idea that it's only when Ugandans have a free vote that you can have a credible government.
Okay.
But I think that since he has come to the conclusion that elections don't work, maybe he can join us in formulating another route.
He's formulating a citizen-led action.
Yeah, but all of that is
more disobedience.
Yeah, all of that is meant to provide a platform for him to be electable again.
Okay, our time is running out. But David in Kisasi is watching us and says, I believe the expectations by citizens are so high and even made worse by the politicians. Just like Obama, Uhuru and Magufuli, the actual set in on their economies and their citizens' expectations were not adjusted downwards. Such causes citizens' heartbreak. We have similar expectations with oil, and soon we the citizens appear to be headed for another heartbreak. David in Kisasi. Someone is announcing that Red Pepper will be back on the streets tomorrow. They've been out of circulation for the last 2 months, and we've been talking about them for as long as they've been off of circulation. Dr. Mhumza, let me come back to you as we wind up this discussion. What needs to happen to make sure that the remaining 3 years, to 2020 at least, because that's the contract that exists for now, can deliver what government promised, which is one, Kisanja Kuna Mchezo, number 2 is lower middle income status?
I think 2 things. One is just to assure the lady, sorry I didn't get her name, who said we were supposed to audit the 32 years. You know, when we do audit of corporate institutions and you find the results are so bad, you stop focusing on the results anymore and you audit the process. You get into what is the process that generated these unwanted results.
I think what she was looking for is, you know, how many hospital beds.
Exactly. So we looked at that and there wasn't a good report to consider. So we are trying to audit the process and make recommendations. And I think, as you're saying, what needs to happen? I think the first thing is to change that process. Unfortunately, the current dispensation of how the politics and the government is structured cannot deliver anything in the promises of the 2020. You have to change the system first. That is the first thing that must happen. And we have been saying here, how does it happen? Does it come in crisis, or can we find another way how it happens? If that does not happen, that system doesn't change, then forget about all the promises of 2020. Because most of these promises have been there before. We're supposed to be at middle income status by 2017. The year has passed. We are not anywhere near. So even 2020 will find us there. Standard gauge, I don't see anywhere. Oil, I don't see anything there. So all sorts of things will not happen. And I think we are discussing here the fundamental issues of what needs to change in the politics
to be able to impact the...
To be able to impact. You already
economies.
have companies dying. I met a friend the other day whose business was making 300 million a month. Today he's making 45 and he's closing it. I went down at Game, some place I used to go for tea, cup of coffee. I found it closed. So these are the things that are happening. So unless you really change the status quo, more and more are going to close as we get towards the 2020.
Honor, what can be done? What can
Well,
change?
within the current context, I think one thing that could be changed, but maybe I'm not seeing it, is something akin to, I know Angelo says can't work, or even a doctor, a welfare state. I came first with this grant to the elderly on a Friday during the NRM day within my village. I bumped into a situation where I was supposed to speak to the officials who are managing for some older person who has been on a waiting list for 2 years because they want only 100 per sub-county in the pilot area, and the only chance for them to join the list is if the other people die.
I'm told they are going to lift the
Then
elder to age 85
then
now.
they become
Who gets
90,
there?
either 98 or 90, then this other one could join. Then I said, schemes like this could be expanded, but to drive industrial growth. Instead of giving them cash, give goods, a basket of basic things like soap, which are deliberately aimed at driving expansion of industries that produce those items. Give money.
I thought that's what they started packaging when we started electioneering in 1996.
I don't know.
Packaging
So
pieces
all
of
all
soap,
I'm saying is,
sugar.
no, that's a different matter.
Yes.
These are just bought haphazardly. I'm saying you can get manufacturers say, what do you need to expand the per capita consumption of items which are basics in the household? It's so low. What do you need to expand? They cannot expand because they don't have the purchasing power in the population. So they have to expand based on ability for the market to absorb
to absorb what they're producing.
So you could actually put money indirectly, and I'm sure you could avoid some element of inflation, not giving cash to people, but give money to producers of goods that also use local raw materials.
You
have that.
Does it matter how the
circular
politics is
economy.
organized?
Onapiro was at State House when the same idea was entertained by the president for the milk industry. Remember there was a scheme to provide children in UPE
who are malnourished across
with milk
the country.
and with a cereal, and for that to be procured locally, and it failed miserably.
So instead of putting all the money into some...
Gentlemen, our time is out. We need to get out of here. But just someone sent me some extremely horrible images in a dispute involving the office of the Prime Minister and what you'd call a local investor near the Kyaka refugee settlement. The Minister for Lands was there the other day. They've had a dispute for about 1.5 years now. When Ugandans were expelled from Tanzania, they were settled in that refugee settlement. And apparently they moved into this gentleman's farm, occupied 200 acres. And they've been fighting. Dr. Mumza, you're just looking at the images. The extremely nasty images, because when the minister was there trying to help open the boundaries, there was a fight, some instigation, and they cut his animals. And he's been a breeder, supplying cows both within Uganda and Rwanda and neighboring countries, which is a dispute they have failed to resolve. And I just can't understand why they failed to resolve that dispute. Looking at those images, you're talking about the milk industry. If someone is putting in their money and is trying to do something, I think it's incumbent upon government to find a way to accommodate both the refugees, those displaced Ugandans, and someone who's putting their money.
I'm only hoping the
what I now is saying, Charles,
economy.
let's just expand as you conclude. This idea of indigenization of the economy, I think, is one way to go. I have a client who is in the energy sector, dominated by foreign firms. I can't even begin to tell you, Mhumza knows how much we pay for the electricity. Just one power company, the taxpayer pays $7 million a month. But it's an industry dominated by foreign firms. The only access we have had to that sector has been the shares that the National Social Security Fund has purchased of Umeme. That's going in a correct direction. If you look at all these capital-intensive sectors, and you have a deliberate policy to put money in the hands of local industry and expand it, I think that Ugandans will be very, very happy because one, it guarantees that their taxpayers' money is going to generate the next job.
Yeah, you know,
But
just
if
going back to those
things like
old
that,
people.
I'm afraid our time is out. We need to
yes.
get out of here. We've really overshot our time. We need to get out of here. Sorry.
Good.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very
Next
much, Angelo. Thank you very much, Konapito. Thank you very much, Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Thank you very much to you, all our viewers, for joining us tonight and always, and especially those of you who called us, and those who sent us feedback, and each one who watched the show. Thank you very much to our production crew that stays up late to deliver the show to you. From me, it's a good night.
Thank you.